This tax is unaffordable to many. Many of us are struggling to afford housing, food, gas, and utilities. All of these things have increased in the last 2 years.
New this morning, people living in Salem are speaking out about a new tax proposal. It could mean more money being taken from their paychecks.
Fox 12's Mia Villanueva joins us now live in studio with who this tax would hit the most. Mia?
Given Shauna, the payroll tax would apply to people who work for a business within Salem city limits. So that includes people who are self-employed, as well as remote workers and people who commute to Salem. People who make minimum wage, however, would be exempt. Now, the median salary for Salem is just over $62,000 a year. So under the proposal, anyone making that much would get about $42 taken out of their paycheck every month. Now, that equals a little over $500 a year. The City Council held a hearing on this proposal during their meeting yesterday and opened the floor up for comment from the community.
A choice to move forward with the Safe Salem payroll tax will put us on a path of growing our services and a more stable financial future. A choice to not move forward means that we will be faced with creating a smaller organization with less capacity to deliver services to our community.
This tax, a payroll tax, will discourage people from wanting to work in Salem, which is exactly the opposite of what I think any community would like.
The city argues the Safe Salem payroll tax is necessary because the city is growing. With the population rising, they say they need to stabilize and eventually expand services like police, fire, and help for the homeless. In a 5-4 vote last night, the City Council decided to move forward with a second reading of the proposal. Now, it's not clear just yet when that will happen, but if the City Council passes the proposal, the payroll tax could take effect as early as July of next year. Reporting live in studio, I'm Mia Villanueva. Good day, Oregon.